Let's talk for a minute about internal planes and internal signal layers. For a two-layer board, that won't be an option, but for a multi-layer board, if you do a big project, you might need 4 layers. It's often nice, especially for ground noise instances, to have internal power planes. So let's look and see how to do that. Come up here to the top. We have Design, Layer Stack Manager. We're looking again at the same nice graphic visual of our board. There's a bottom layer and a top layer. I have some options over here on the right hand side of this drop down window. It says Add Layer, Add Plane. So let's do that. Let's add a plane. I'm going to add a plane. You'll see when I add a plane, it basically adds a sheet of copper in the center of my board. It's one big sheet. Now let's add a layer. When I add a layer, it's not a whole sheet of copper, it's signals. It's just signals. And we can make nets on these. You'll see that the mid layer can route, just like the bottom layer and top layer, the internal plane needs to be connected to a net. So I can double click, select a net name. Now there's a lot of nets in my project, right? I have plus 12 volts, minus 12 volts, ground, input. All these are the nets that are inside my project. Maybe I want mine to be ground. I'll tell it be ground. I want you to be ground. So now I have a third layer in here for signals and a fourth layer that's going to be just ground. Let's take a look and see what that does for our project. If I come up here and save, come to auto route all. I'm going to be lazy with the auto route instead of hand routing just for the demonstration purposes because it's faster. I'm going to tell it route all. And it's going to route all my connections. Routing finished, 0 contentions, failed to complete, 0 connections. Looks like everything worked. So here's my top layer. I can see the red. These are top layers. Here's my bottom layer, blue. And look, I have a mid layer that's yellow. Do I have any yellow traces in here in the mid layer? Yes, I do. Here's one that's going through the mid layer. So now I have 3 layers coming through here of signals. But I also have a ground. Look over here at my ground. It looks like there's no connection at all. But wait a minute. Let's click on our internal plane tab down here so we can see what's going on. Look at that. Here's my internal plane. It's a sheet of copper in the middle, and they remove just the areas we need to. So here there's no ground connection. They just take the copper out around the edge. On this one I do want a connection. And what does it do? It puts these little spokes to connect that tab. Now why do they do it? Why do we use spokes? Well, let me give you a good reason why they use the spokes. This whole sheet of copper inside this board will act as a heat sink. So when I go to solder this part, as the solder starts to flow in the hole and reach this point, let's look again at our layer stack manager. The solder flows, it hits this point. This, being a solid sheet of copper, will suck all the heat out of that via. This hole is called a via. It'll suck all the heat out of that via, and the solder won't melt here until I get this entire board hot. And that takes a while on a big iron, and it may get hot enough long enough to start delaminating the copper off the top of my board. So the way around that is to put these little spokes. Now I have a nice electrical connection, but I don't suck all the heat out. I can solder my parts. So that's my internal layer. And you can see I now have a mid layer, a top layer, a bottom layer, and this internal ground layer. Let's go back to our layer stack manager. I'm going to unroute everything. I'm going to go back to my layer stack manager here. And I'm going to say, yeah, I don't want a mid layer. Let's delete it. I'm going to add another plane. And I'll make this plane, I'm going to make it say plus 12 volts. Now I have 2 planes. You see I don't have the little signal wires in there. 2 separate planes. Now let's do our auto route all. We'll route the whole board again. Finish routing, no contentions. Okay, didn't fail anything. Now look, I have plane 1. Here's my ground connections. plane 2. What's connected on plane 2? Well, let's look. Aha, my plus 12 volts is connected on plane 2. So this will give you an option to see how you can add internal layers and internal planes. Let me show you something else you can do with a plane that you may not realize you can do. I have this plane set up now so that this plane, internal plane 1, you can see it right here, is ground. So let's do this. I'm going to draw on my plane. This is going to be different. I'm going to come in here and say place a line on my plane. I'll zoom in here. Now currently it's a ground plane, right? I'm going to do this. I'm going to come up here and just draw this rough shape here. Doesn't matter how nice it looks. And now look, I can highlight this part of the plane or this part. Let me double click this part, and I'm going to tell it I want that part to be minus 12 volts. Now look, I have a ground plane, I have a plus 12 volt plane, and I've made a split plane. So the thing you want to remember on these planes is when I'm on a signal layer, see I'm on this signal layer, when I say place a line, I'm drawing in copper on that line. When I'm on an internal plane and I say place a line, I'm actually removing the copper because it's a plane, it's not a signal layer, so they become reversals. So on a signal layer I add copper, on a plane I remove copper. So I can actually draw a box, split a plane, and have 12 volts in ground on the same layer. I just split my plane with these boxes. So let's do that. I'm going to do that and unroute everything. Under Tools, Unroute All. I'm going to come back to my design, Layer Stack Manager. I'm going to get rid of these because we're not going to need them. All we want is a top layer and a bottom layer. Alright, so let's look at it. I'm going to route all. Back to where we started. We just wanted to go over some rules and some information on how to add planes, how to add internal signal layers. Routing finished, 0 contentions, failed to complete 0 connections. Alright, my project's good again. I'll save all, and we'll stop this video here and we'll move on to the next section.